so many bodyguards, he was in command of a small army. The name suited him. The commander was not a good man. He was a drug dealer, exporting cocaine on a massive scale. He also controlled one of the most vicious gangs in Peru, torturing and killing anyone who got in his way. But all this meant nothing to Hunter and Cossack. They were here because they'd been paid $30,000 apiece to take him out, and if the commander had been a doctor or a priest, it would have made no difference to them. Hunter glanced at his watch. It was 8 in the morning, and he'd been told the commander would be leaving for Lima on the hour. He also knew that the commander was a punctual man. He loaded a single .308 cartridge into the Winchester and adjusted the sniper scope. 1 shot was all he would need. Meanwhile, Cossack had taken out his field glasses and was scanning the compound for any sign of movement. The younger man was not afraid, but he was tense and excited. A trickle of perspiration curved behind his ear and ran down his neck. His mouth was dry. Something tapped gently against his back, and he wondered if Hunter had touched him, warning him to stay calm. But Hunter was a short distance away, concentrating on the gun. Something moved. Cossack only knew for certain it was there when it climbed over his shoulder and onto his neck. And by then, it was too late. Very slowly, he turned his head, and there it was, at the very edge of his field of vision. A spider, clinging to the side of his neck, just underneath the line of his chin. He swallowed. From the weight of it, he had thought it was a tarantula. But this was worse, much worse. It was very black, with a small head, and an obscene, swollen body like a fruit about to burst. He knew that if he could have turned it over, he would have found a red hourglass marking on its abdomen. It was a black widow, Latrodectus curacaviensis, one of the deadliest spiders in the world. The spider moved, its front legs reaching out so that one was almost touching the corner of Cossack's mouth. The other legs were still attached to his neck, with the main body of the spider now hanging under his jaw. He wanted to swallow again, but he didn't dare. Any movement might alarm the creature, which needed no excuse to attack. Cossack guessed that this was the female of the species, 1,000 times worse than the male. If it decided to bite him, its hollow fangs would inject him with a neurotoxic venom that would paralyze his entire nervous system. He would feel nothing at first. There would just be 2 tiny red pricks on his skin. The pain, waves of it, would come in about an hour. His eyelids would swell, he would be unable to breathe. He would go into convulsions. He would almost certainly die. Cossack considered raising a hand and trying to flick the hideous thing off. If it had been anywhere else on his body, he might have taken the chance. But it had settled on his throat, as though fascinated by the pulse it had found there. He wanted to call Hunter, but he couldn't risk moving the muscles in his neck. He was barely breathing. Hunter was still unaware of what was going on. What could he do? In the end, he whistled. It was the only sound he dared make. He was horribly aware of the creature hanging off him. He felt the prick of another leg, this time touching his lip. Was it about to climb onto his face? Hunter looked over and saw at once that something was wrong. Cossack was standing unnaturally still, his head contorted, his face underneath the paint completely white. Hunter took a step so that Cossack now stood between him and the compound. He had lowered the rifle, the muzzle pointing toward the ground. And then he saw the spider. At the same moment, the door of the house opened and the commander came out, a short, plump man dressed in a dark tunic hanging open at the collar. Unshaven, he was carrying a briefcase and smoking a cigarette. 20 steps to the helicopter, and he was already moving briskly, talking to the 2 bodyguards who accompanied him. Cossack's eyes flickered over to Hunter. He knew the organization that had employed them would not forgive failure, and this was the only chance they would get. The spider moved again, and looking down, Cossack saw its head, a cluster of tiny, gleaming eyes, 6 of them, gazing up at him, uglier than anything in the world. His skin itched. The whole side of his face wanted to peel itself away. But he knew there was nothing Hunter could do. He had to fire now. The commander was only 10 steps away from the helicopter. The blades were already turning. Cossack wanted to scream at him, "Do it!" The sound of the gunshot would frighten the spider, and it would bite. But that wasn't important. The mission had to succeed. Hunter quickly considered his options. He could use the tip of the gun to brush away the Black Widow. He might succeed in getting rid of it before it bit Cossack. But by then the commander would be in his helicopter behind bulletproof glass. Or he could shoot the commander. But once he had fired the gun, he would have to turn and run immediately, disappearing into the jungle. There would be no time to help Cossack. There would be nothing he could do. He made his decision. He swept up the gun, aimed, and fired. The bullet, white-hot, flashed past, cutting a line in Cossack's neck. The Black Widow disintegrated instantly, blown apart by the force of the shot. The bullet continued across the clearing and through the fence, and still carrying tiny fragments of the Black Widow with it, buried itself in the commander's chest. The commander had been about to climb into the helicopter. He stopped as though surprised, put a hand to his heart, and crumpled. The bodyguards twisted around, shouting, staring into the jungle, trying to see the enemy. But Hunter and Cossack had already gone. The jungle swallowed them in seconds, although it was more than an hour before they stopped to catch their breath. Cossack was bleeding. There was a red line that could have been drawn with a ruler across the side of his neck, and the blood had seeped down, soaking into his shirt. But the Black Widow hadn't bitten him. He held out a hand, accepting a water bottle from Hunter, and drank. "You saved my life," he said. Hunter considered. To take a life and save a life with one bullet. That's not bad going. Cossack would have the scar for the rest of his life, but that would not be a very long time. The life of the professional assassin is often short. Hunter would die first, in another country, on another mission. Later, it would be his turn. Right now, Cossack said nothing. They had done their job. That was all that mattered. He gave back the water bottle, and as the sun beat down and the jungle watched and reflected upon what had happened, the two men set off together, cutting and hacking their way through the mid-morning heat of another day. Chapter 1. Not My Business. Alex Ryder lay on his back, drying out in the midday sun. He could feel the salt water from his last swim trickling through his hair and evaporating off his chest. His shorts, still wet, clung to him. He was, at that moment, as happy as it is possible to be. 1 week into a vacation that had been perfect from the moment the plane had touched down in Montpellier and he had stepped out into the brilliance of his first Mediterranean day. He loved the south of France. The intense colours, the smells, the pace of life that hung on to every minute and refused to let go. He hadn't any idea what time it was, except that he was getting hungry, and guessed it must soon be time for lunch. There was a brief burst of music as a girl with a radio walked past, and Alex turned his head to follow her. And that was when the sun went in, the sea froze, and the whole world seemed to catch its breath. He wasn't looking at the girl with the radio. He was looking past her, down to the seawall that divided the beach from the jetty, where a yacht was just pulling in. The yacht was enormous, almost the size of one of the passenger boats that carried tourists up and down the coast, but no tourists would ever set foot on this craft. It was completely uninviting, cruising silently through the water with tinted glass in the windows and a massive bow that rose up like a solid white wall. A man stood at the very front, staring straight ahead, his face blank. It was a face that Alex recognized instantly. Yassen Gregorovich. Alex sat perfectly still, supporting himself on one arm, his hand half buried in the sand. As he watched, a man in his 20s appeared from the cabin and busied himself mooring the boat. He was short and ape-like, wearing a T-shirt that showed off the tattoos that completely covered his arms and shoulders. A deckhand? Yassen made no offer to help him with his work. A third man hurried along the jetty to greet the yacht. He was fat and bald, dressed in a cheap white suit. The top of his head had been burned by the